Sorry, I thought we were unmuting it on the back end. I will start again. Hey, everyone. Hope you're having amazing Wednesdays after the long weekend. I think it goes without saying that these short weeks are crazy for all, and we really appreciate you being here today over your lunch break. I know we're swinging into a very busy fall, and our sports seasons are right around the corner. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining. I'm thrilled to welcome everyone to the second edition of our Summer Summit series, a bit of a tongue twister there, where we want to share some insights and news updates about our seasons ahead that are relevant to your partnership, but also are hopefully insightful and educational far beyond those topics themselves. A very quick thank you to everyone who joined us a couple weeks ago for our topic on Gen Z. We hope you found it impactful. And a reminder, if you want a recording of that we can provide that for you. Just reach out to your GP rep and we'll send it over. For today, I am beyond excited about our topic, super relevant to the theme of the week with back to school. Our friends at MLSE Foundation have been working fearlessly over the summer months. They're really pushing forward in our goal to raise over $30 million in 4 years. No small feat to invest in our community. We're hoping to change the game by helping youth recognize and reach their full potential. Over the next hour, we're going to be hearing from two incredible leaders at MLSE Launchpad. First is Brian Heel, who is our Manager of Research and Evaluation. And second is Marika Warner, who is our Director of Research and Evaluation. Brian and Marika are going to share some critical insights from a recent research study done with U of T, which outlines barriers and opportunities around youth participation in sport. They're going to share some key insights on the impacts of COVID-19 affecting youth in our community as well. For those who are interested in community sport programs, I encourage you to think about how these are applicable into your goals and objectives. Or maybe you're just interested in this space or have current programs already, or maybe you just have kids at home or you're around your local community. Hopefully, we're going to show you some of those key opportunities for all of us to help youth in our communities to help engage with and participate in sport and to also positively benefit from it. Very quickly before we begin, I need to touch on a couple of housekeeping items. First is for optimal viewing. I really encourage you to go to full screen view. There's lots of crucial information, so we don't want anyone missing anything. And second, if you have questions, which I'm sure you'll have lots, just throw them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, I will kick it over to Marika and Brian, and we will learn why and how we can all help change the game.
Fantastic. And yes, welcome. Thank you for being here today. I'm just going to start with a little bit of context around this project and what compelled MLSE Foundation to conduct a study, which is a one-of-a-kind study and largest of its kind study. So pre-pandemic, in the youth sports sector, we already had quite strong evidence of a lack of opportunities for sport participation among certain demographics. And that included lower engagement among girls, youth from lower income households, racialized youth, youth with disabilities. But we really lacked some good data, even pre-pandemic, on what engagement levels were really like among different demographic groups. So moving towards reopening and rebuilding the youth sports sector, it was really important for us as MLSE Foundation, as well as for the entire youth sports sector, to understand how the pandemic had impacted youth sport participation and if certain groups had been harder hit, and what youth were experiencing out there, what youth were feeling like they needed to be able to re-engage as we move into a reopening. There's not a lot of this type of data available, and we really felt that it was important to generate it. So Bry's going to walk us through our agenda for today.
Thanks, Morgan, Marika, and everyone for attending. Over the next 40 to 45 minutes, we're going to walk you through the background and origin story of the study itself, how it came to be, what sets this particular data set and study apart from other types of research of its kind, and then we're going to have a conversation about 5 key topics or themes that really stood out from the findings and from what we've been hearing from youth from across the province. And lastly, the term insight to action is a bit of an internal mantra for us, and it really is about, it's not good enough just to collect all the data and learn from it. We have to do something about it. So over the course of this presentation, we're going to have a dialogue of what are the needs and barriers that we've been hearing, but how are we actually doing at changing the game and what still needs to get done. So to help kick us off with that, tapping Marika back in for an overview of Foundation overall to help set the context for how this study was born.
So for those not as familiar with MLSE Foundation and what we do, I'll just do a quick breakdown. So we have a large community investment reach. We grant out a large amount of funds every year through various granting streams. Those funds go to support different grassroots and we have a really supportive granting model for those organizations. We also do a lot of capacity building in the sector with youth sport organizations to help them do programming better so that youth can experience better outcomes and want to continue to re-engage in sport and physical activity. We also run programs throughout the Greater Toronto area. We engage in facility builds and refurbishments as well in partnership with the city and other partners. And of course, we own and operate MLSE Launchpad, our 42,000 square foot home at Dundas and Jarvis, where we have over 10,000 members pre-pandemic engaged in sport programming 6 days a week. A big differentiator for MLSE Foundation compared to other pro sport charities and other organizations in the sport for development space is our real strong focus on research and evaluation. So we're constantly assessing what we do, determining the impact of our investments, really demonstrating the impact of our investments as well. In a really rigorous way. We often publish in academic journals, as well as translating what we learn back to the sector so that everyone can hopefully learn and raise the tide across the sector. So I'll throw back to Bri with a little bit on what change the game means to us.
And to help answer that question, we are going to start by walking you through its origin story. What is Change the Game campaign? And here is a brief video to help set us up for this conversation.
Every game starts 0-0. But does it?
Because I play on the team least expected to win.
With all the odds stacked against us.
Underestimated. Overlooked.
With often very few in our corner.
And break.
Benefit of the doubt? Unlikely.
Margin for error?
Non-existent.
So what do you do when you show up to a game that's already been fixed?
You change the game and write a new ending.
Okay, so this Change the Game research study was a large-scale youth sport census that we designed to assess youth sport access, engagement, and equity in the wake of the pandemic as we move into a societal reopening. So as I mentioned, pre-pandemic, we already had a strong sense of which groups were disproportionately affected by obstacles and barriers to accessing sport participation and the long-term impacts that that has for youth. But this new report that we've created gives a really objective, really nuanced look at how the pandemic has actually impacted youth sport participation for different groups of youth across Ontario, as well as what we need to do to rebuild our sector better. So we convened and led a coalition of different sport industry stakeholders that included funders, programming delivery organizations, as well as researchers to study back to play issues and to generate some data that would drive recommendations to help inform strong research, policy, investment, and programming decisions as we move into this societal reopening. We really want to support widespread re-engagement of youth in sport and really improve on the current context where one of our findings was that youth currently are playing sports on average less than once per week, which is quite distressing for us in the sector. So the findings were quite clear and quite significant, and we'll get into a little bit more detail about that. But, to really summarize off the top, the pandemic has further stratified youth sport participation along the lines of gender, race, as well as income level. And we need to implement some changes now to build a youth sport system where everyone is able to play. Okay.
So how did we do?
Okay, well, I'll speak a little bit about who participated. We had over almost 7,000 youth, and we found as we got this research project out into the field that youth and parents were all really eager to provide their input. So not that it wasn't a lot of work to generate this volume of data, it took a ton of effort, but it was just like folks were waiting to be asked about these issues and just had so much to say about what it's been like to have sport taken away out of their lives for the past several months and what they want to see as things move towards reopening. So just, the floodgates opened and the input poured in from across the province. And Brad, do you want to speak a bit about the demographics of our sample?
Absolutely, and I even just want to add a little bit to what you just said there, because one of the things that, being in the research game and conducting a lot of surveys on a lot of different issues, one thing that is just really rare is when you see people taking the time to fill in those open-ended boxes. There's often a behavior that you see where people are kind of clicking through the multiple choice ones, leaving the optional ones blank. This was not the case in this study. Like almost 40% of the 7,000 youth took the time to share stories, real life examples of, really indicating that this topic and this issue and sort of in almost like the loss of sport due to COVID really struck a nerve, and they had something to say. And a lot of what we're talking about today and a lot of what we put in the report is around doing justice to the voices that have come through in this study. But stories aside, we're number crunchers at heart. We've done a lot of comparisons against census, against other sort of reference points. And outside of like the volume that Marika spoke to, the sample that we have in this study is representatively diverse across Ontario in terms of gender, race, household income, ability levels, and regionality across different parts of the province itself. It's a real point of pride to be able to dig under the hood and not only rely on sort of the top line averages and the majority when formulating our recommendations and decision making. If there are specific communities or groups of youth or parts of the province that are responding to certain issues in a different way, we have that intel. We're armed with that data and those insights to help guide our path forward in terms of investments we want to make and where we want to sound the alarm for the sector and the system as a whole. So armed with those thousands of youth having shared their experiences, challenges, and ideas for how to improve sport, the results were clear. So for this next 20 to 25 minutes, we're going to key in on 5 key questions or themes, each spending about 4 to 5 minutes on each. And my first question to you, Marika, is, across all the data in this study, what is the single largest barrier to youth participation in sport?
Yeah, and that really comes down to cost and affordability. The pandemic has further stratified participation along those income lines, and we really need to make some changes. So that's the greatest barrier, is the cost of programming and equipment. And we learned that this affects youth across every income level. So it's not just youth from lower income households, those families that are struggling to pay sport registration fees and purchase equipment, all the way up to the highest income bracket that we surveyed. Families were reporting the same concern, which is quite concerning for us in the sector. But of course, those impacts are more profound for youth from lower income households, which are more likely to be Black, Indigenous, and other racialized households. So many households have also experienced a decreased income, of course, during the pandemic, which makes it even harder to prioritize fees for sport programming as things reopen. So moving forward, Ontario's youth really do need to see more free or low cost, high quality sport programming. And this is a population health issue, as well as a racial justice issue and a broader equity issue, in that youth that are denied access to sport are denied access to all of the proven benefits that go along with sport participation relating to their physical and mental health, their academic success, and their future employment success as well. So we see this as a really pressing issue to really generate some more programming that is affordable and accessible, and to find ways to help youth get the equipment that they need to be able to participate as well.
Totally. And one of the things that really that I really want to reiterate that you just said is that the holistic nature of what cost and affordability looks like. So certainly, if in the context of calling out for an expansion of low cost, free, subsidized sport opportunities. Consider equipment, consider transportation, consider like the fees of participation in a club. If we're really wanting to put the youth and the family at the center of the experience and of the proverbial barrier that we want to break or change, we need to look at what is actually preventing them from getting in the game. And it's those three things predominantly, depending on who you ask. I'm reminded of, this was an anonymous study, so people didn't have to share their personal contact information or anything. There was always an option to sort of reach out to us for if you want to talk about it beyond sort of the questions that were asked. And there was a gentleman who reached out to me, and we kind of had a conversation, and he was really fired up about what started as a dialogue about his kids growing up so fast. And he reminded me of my uncle in a lot of ways. But as we really got into it, like the conclusion he came to, and where he wanted to land for me, is that just outside of all the other expenses in their family's life, just the cost of keeping up with clothes, equipment, shoes. So beyond sort of we know that sort of certain sports are expensive. Like if you want to play hockey and you need goalie equipment, that's like specialized gear. But for just the upkeep of shoes and everything else to just get your foot in the door, it's a really important point that those of us who are in the business of providing sport opportunities, we want to really make sure that we have a very holistic understanding of what cost barriers are to youth who are walking through our doors. So if that is the big sort of access issue, there are still a lot of youth who are able to play or who have been able to play. The other, one of the other, topical things, in society and in sport right now is related to race, discrimination, EDI. It's since the murder of George Floyd, it's taken on, conversations of this nature have taken on a different level in the public discourse in and out of sport. But in the context of this study and the youth across Ontario, what did they have to say about their own experiences in sport?
Yeah, so, and I'll speak a bit to race, but inclusion is not limited to race, and we have some really interesting findings relating to girls and young women and youth with disabilities as well. So from racialized youth, we hear that they need sport systems that reflect who they are. So they want to see coaches that look like them, organizations that respect their culture, and they cite these things as being really important to support their re-engagement in the sport system. And this is a long-term issue, but maybe one that's been exacerbated by the events of the last couple of years. So we also heard specifically from other equity-seeking groups, Indigenous youth, youth with disabilities, girls and young women, about what they need to see in the space to support their re-engagement. So the affordability issue consistently came up among equity-seeking groups. And the other piece was health and safety. So these equity-seeking groups identified having very strong health and safety protocols in place in sport context as being very important to support their re-engagement. And that's coming from both parents in terms of what they need to feel comfortable sending their kids back into a sport context, as well as from the youth themselves who are saying they don't feel safe participating. And if a youth does not feel psychologically and physically safe in a program, they're not going to be able to have fun and develop confidence and build friendships and all the great things that we know sport can accomplish when it's done right. So as well as youth with disabilities who are certainly at greater risk of adverse outcomes. So to support that equitable re-engagement from different groups, we really do need to be putting strong health and safety protocols in place in youth sport programming.
Yeah, and the themes of psychological safety, they really stand out too. I think speaking a little bit about the qualitative nature of what came back, wellness and having a mental health outlet are two themes that really stood out. But also, to speak a little bit about the second bullet on the screen that you're seeing too, is that outside of what exists, the idea that so few young people feel like they have someone they can talk to about a difficult experience is really one that stands out to me as well. It's about how do you show up and feel part of a team when you don't have the trust of the teammates about who you are. So that really stood out for me in sort of a bit of a sobering kind of way. But what was incredibly encouraging is that the participants in this research went far beyond admiring the problem per se, and offered ideas. What can we do to actually improve the system for them? And using the example of teammates who accept who I am, or coaches that look like me. It's a short statement in of itself, but that has real implications. And how you actually change that, there's different things for an organization, for policymakers. What are some of the interventions or ways forward that you see, Marika, as being most important for addressing some of these issues?
Yeah, so across the board, sort of moving on from the inclusion conversation, we know youth need to see a system that's just built around the reasons that they play. And this is something that we heard from them. So the reasons that youth engage in sport: fun, developing their competence, opportunities to connect with others, opportunities to find role models that they can relate to. And opportunities to feel like they belong somewhere, which is more important now than ever. And we also need to adjust our system, to tweak our system, to really prioritize positive youth outcomes like mental health, like youth employment, which, sometimes those positive outcomes can be sacrificed at the expense of competition and winning. So really prioritizing the mental health piece and some of the other social outcomes of sport as we move into reopening to support that re-engagement.
In a lot of ways, it sounds as if this time of this pandemic, this study, it really put to the forefront, not just the game itself, but what it represents in the lives of youth, where it's a place to be able to meet other people, get to know other people, and set goals, enjoy themselves, and having lost that outlet, and both in terms of sport, leagues, competitions, and I'd even put school as a driver for some of these issues too. Is that we're looking at 2 years in of not having school sports, which has been a huge provider of free and accessible sport opportunities for so many, that it just, all these issues have just been compounded. And as we start to go back online, and youth reopens, it's back to school season, the economy is reopening, vaccine rates are slowly ticking up in our province. You mentioned belonging a little bit earlier. What evidence are we seeing that investing in sport and doing these things now can lead to some of those bigger, broader community outcomes?
Yeah, so we're seeing a ton of evidence there. We found a very strong correlation between sport participation and sense of community belonging. And with a sample size of almost 7,000, that evidence is, and the strength of the correlation makes that finding irrefutable. So regardless of their gender, their race, household income, ability status, their geographical location in Ontario, all of the factors, the youth who participated in sports pre-pandemic were much more likely to be experiencing a strong sense of community belonging, even in the middle of lockdown, which is when we conducted research. So this is a pretty surprising insight for us, and that points to sport as a very powerful way to rebuild that sense of community connection and belonging as society reopens, which is especially vital for youth who are feeling disconnected after some very challenging, very isolating months. So that evidence-based strategy to build community belonging through sport is something really important that came out of this work.
So, and this is a finding that really just didn't exist before either. We've, Toronto Foundation, United Ways, others have kind of done some preliminary work around things like sense of belonging, social capital, those sort of neighborhood level kind of indicators that help a community sort of thrive, if you will. But the data and the evidence, certainly in the GTA and in Ontario, around youth and lower income youth and racialized youth have been fairly stark in below a lot of the population averages. This is both the confidence behind these numbers, the sides of the study, but being able to contribute hard data and hard evidence that really points as sport as an intervention for community improvement and development. This is probably one of the strongest sort of pieces of data in the study that points to a way forward and does beyond sort of identifying and picking at a need or a long-standing barrier, but really kind of looks at it from an intervention and a change type of place, which segues into our fifth and final topic. The pandemic has given us an opportunity to really explore what life is like without sport. That for the good, the bad, the ugly. When we think, outside of specific programs, interventions, recommendations, if we were to think big and dream about what reimagining sport sort of could be, where does your mind go?
Yeah, so always to the silver linings of this whole brouhaha and opportunities to create something new. So, this was a huge opportunity for us to create this report that we launched, this study that we conducted, and this series of recommendations for funders, programming organizations, for policymakers, for researchers, to hopefully use that multi-pronged approach to really change the game and change how youth sport is delivered and support an equitable return to sport and a more equitable access and engagement than what we were seeing even pre-pandemic. So I'm really seeing this pandemic as a force that has slowed down the super tanker or the high-speed freight train that is the youth sport system, that's been doing things the way it does things for however long it's existed, a long time. So it's really come to a grinding halt during the pandemic. And this moment here in 2021 for us is a once in a lifetime opportunity really to alter the trajectory of that super tanker or that train. So these learnings were so vital in that they will help to create a sport system that's better than the one that we left behind in 2020. So really trying to see that as a blessing, the stoppage and this restart as an opportunity to really change the game once again.
Perfect segue. The moment to chart a new course is now. And really what that represents to me is that it's not about addressing the symptoms. It's about changing the game for the long term, for the long run. What are we doing what are we at the MLSE Foundation already doing to change the game, and what's on tap?
Yeah. So, Bri mentioned our insight to action model at the outset. So that's something that's really important to us, is not letting these reports sit on the shelf, but really using the data immediately and appropriately. So, we have granted $1 million through our community action grants this year to 24 different sport for development organizations across Ontario. We are engaging in trust-based philanthropic partnerships with some Black and Indigenous-led organizations to help bring positive programs and services to youth in different communities. And we're also in the midst of reopening MLSE Launchpad to our over 10,000 members and providing programs and services that are tailored to what they're experiencing and to the lived experiences that they're telling us about, that respond to the current needs in the community, which we are constantly reassessing. So those are some of the current ways that we are putting this research into practice.
And along the way, we're in terms of just using the example of reopening MLSE Launchpad to the community and to the public, the findings and the recommendations that are coming out of this report are living in the reopening plans for, whether it's free or low cost programming, strong commitment to health and safety protocols despite the pandemic, emphasis on culture, fun, joy, and engagement to help ensure a positive return to play, rooted in understanding it's been a difficult time and focusing on wellness and other key themes that we've been talking about. But beyond the current, let's take a moment to look at the future and ask the question that's on the title of this presentation. What still needs to happen so that every youth can play?
Yes. So I'm going to give a typical researcher answer. What are the next steps after doing a research study? Well, more research, of course. There's still so much more to learn. So to that end, based on some of the things that we heard through this research, we'll be rolling out a new study this fall, looking at the role of sport in the recovery of youth mental wellness as we move through societal reopening, to look at what that impact is. So that should be really interesting. We also feel we need to invest more in coach training and coach mentorship, so that the coaches that are out there in the community, so that there are more coaches able to provide high quality programming that's going to get the youth outcomes, the positive outcomes that we really are looking for. And then finally, more around girls programming and supporting girls' return to sport. One distressing finding from this project was that 1/3 of girls out of our sample were less interested in engaging in sport now than they were pre-pandemic. So that's a large number when you look at the population, and it's clear that we need to take steps to support girls to re-engage, because we don't want this moment to be when we lost so many girls from the sports sector, from the sports system. So those are some thoughts for moving forward. And Brian, maybe you have something to add. Otherwise, we could bring back Morgan.
Absolutely. I'll just close with saying that quick plug, mlscfoundation.org, if you want to read through the full slate of recommendations we're pulling for. But the one contextual thing that I will kind of say is that back to the sort of the 2022 census idea, is that this study was conducted in a moment of time during the height of the pandemic, and we are going to be hard at work making real our investments connected to this. We're going to be calling upon others to share that sort of vision and mantra for changing the game. And then it is really important, and I'm a researcher too, questions that you answer lead to other questions. We need to do more of this like this at a later date to know, and for sure, how have we actually changed the game, and did we do it well? So with that, let's bring back Morgan for our wrap up and Q&A.
Thank you both. That is honestly so fascinating. I feel like every time I see this report, I learn something new. And it's no surprise to anyone who's ever talked to me that gender equity in sport, especially at a youth level, is a passion point. So I found all of this super helpful. I hope our audience did as well. Just to tee up some questions here. So Brian, first question is for you. What were the most surprising findings from the study, in your opinion?
Great question. And I'm going to say two different things here. One is one about findings and one about process, in terms of like who actually weighed in here. One thing that, really stood out is that, when we do research studies, we're a big believer in providing incentives, offering honoraries and things and things for the time, to respect the time that people take to share their stories and their feedback and their information with us. And of that sort of 7,000, less than half opted in for what I thought were some pretty sweet sort of honoraries. This is they shared their voices without incentive, for the purpose of having their voice heard, and it's just so incredibly rare that that from a delivery of a study perspective, that really stood out. On the findings, I think for me, the sense of belonging chapter really stood out as something that is probably the one of the sort of few parts of this that where you didn't quite know how it was going to turn out going in. Like, we have hypotheses. We sort of, across each of the different sort of questions or themes we ask about, you have a sense that something is going to go a certain way, and the data sometimes affirms it, challenges it, tells a different story entirely. And that happened throughout this study. But sense of belonging, and the idea of sport, really being investments in community sport, really being a community development tool, and with belonging, rooted in belonging, it by far and away that the numbers were not just sort of clear, but overwhelmingly so, and in a way that has really just never existed in this province before. And it in terms of really kind of looking at sport as a way to help guide us and communities out of the pandemic, there's a real opportunity there that we're seeing, and that we want to put on the radar of others who are actively working on this space.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point when we talk about all of the work that you're doing at Launchpad. It's often easy to just think about the power of sport in a physical fitness lens. And I know a couple of the programs I've been lucky enough to volunteer with have really ingrained that sense of community, that sense of belonging, and that really positive mental health outcome. So I'm really glad that you brought that to the forefront here. And it's a really good reminder and maybe a new piece of information for so many of our listeners today. I'm going to switch it over to Marika. This question's for you. Any advice for parents and children returning to play this fall with back to school in place?
Great. I love this question. So yes, I'd say do everything you can to make it safe, social, and fun. And I wish that made a better acronym, but is all we get: safe, social, and fun. So this moment is really an important turning point that could make or break a kid's future relationship to sport through either a negative or a positive first experience back post-lockdown. So really be aware of the organization's health and safety policies. Make sure you're comfortable with them. If the organization is not volunteering that information, is not being upfront with their policies, don't be afraid to ask. Register with a friend or a kid's friend to help kids that are no longer used to group settings to feel more comfortable. And I would say favor programming that focuses on fun over competition, that gives kids opportunities to make eye contact and to build their social skills, which are things that kids are really struggling with now. A lot of adults are really struggling with these things, and that's not their fault. They haven't had opportunities to practice their social skills and eye contact, and we need to give them those opportunities to practice these things. So personally, I'm easing my son back in over the summer. We did one outdoor structured program per week with an organization that I know and trust, and I'll be moving to an indoor program starting later in this month. So hopefully some of that advice resonates.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much. This has been so wonderful. One of the best lunch breaks of the week. So we really appreciate you sharing all of this with us. A reminder to everyone, go check out the research study. If you have any further questions or are interested in helping us change the game, just reach out to your MLSE rep and we will make sure to connect you with the right people. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your lunch break and we will be in touch soon regarding our next session of our Summit series. Thanks, everyone.